They called it a quick check-in. But the moment I walked into that cold, windowless conference room, I knew it wasn't. Richard Hargrove was already seated at the steel table, suit perfect, smile artificial. The HR rep, Dana, I think, stood by the door, not quite meeting my eyes. Something was off. The air had that heavy stillness right before a storm. "Petra," Richard said smoothly, gesturing for me to sit. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." I sat, not responding. "My name is Petra Kozlova. I'm 34 years old, a structural engineer with over a decade of field and design experience. I live in Chicago, though I haven't really had time to live anywhere the past few years. My job, until this morning anyway, was all-consuming. Public infrastructure audits, emergency bridge inspections, sleepless weeks, and weekend site calls. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. I mattered." Richard opened a sleek black folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. "We think it's time to part ways," he said. "This formalizes that." The letter was already typed up, dated, signed, and ready. "Voluntary resignation," it said. I stared at it. My pulse was steady, but there was a distant ringing in my ears. They were really doing it. "This doesn't have to be messy," Richard added. "You sign this, walk away clean, and we'll keep things quiet. No industry noise." I looked at him. "You're threatening to blacklist me." He didn't blink. "I'm giving you a dignified exit." A pause stretched in the room, broken only by the low hum of the fluorescent lights. This wasn't unexpected. I'd seen it coming. The emails quietly vanishing from my sent folder. The calendar invites that stopped including me. The last-minute site assignments in the middle of nowhere. And especially the invoices. Those quietly ballooning steel orders tied to shell suppliers, which I had dared to question. Still, the gall of it. After 10 years of loyal work, after spearheading the stress tolerance algorithm that saved the firm millions, after pulling all-nighters to pass emergency inspections on short timelines, this was how it ended. Richard's phone buzzed, and he picked it up without excusing himself. "1 second," he said, turning his chair away. That was my cue. I pulled a pen from my bag, slid the resignation letter toward me. My fingers were steady. Muscle memory after years of field reports and legal documentation. 1 sentence, just one change. I crossed out voluntary resignation and wrote in neat, precise ink, "Constructive termination under duress." I signed it and slid it back. Richard ended the call and glanced at the page. He didn't even read it. Just nodded and closed the folder. "Security will escort you out." I stood. "Understood." But before I left, I reached into my coat and placed a sealed envelope on the table. HR's copy. Inside, a summary of every invoice discrepancy, meeting note, email thread, documented, dated, and preserved. The real resignation letter, my version, was also time-stamped in my secure cloud. The signature recorded with a photo. I walked out calmly. On my way past Luca's desk, I leaned in just long enough to say, "Check the supplier files under Project Mercury. You'll see it." Nico, the security guard, nodded at me with quiet respect as he walked me to the elevator. "Take care, Petra." "I will." This wasn't over, it was just the first move. I wasn't always like this. Careful, calculating, always one move ahead. But when you grow up in a country where your future hangs on the thickness of your boots and the steadiness of your welds, you learn to be deliberate. My father was a machinist in Kharkiv, the kind of man who measured life in millimeters and metal fatigue. He used to say, "You trust the beam when you've seen its bones." He taught me to weld before I turned 12. Not for fun, but because he wanted me to understand structure, to see how everything had a breaking point if you weren't paying attention. We didn't have much, but what we built right. When we moved to the States, I was 13. I barely spoke English. My mom cleaned office buildings at night. My dad found work in a machine shop in Joliet. I learned quick. Keep your head down, don't make mistakes. Fix them fast if you do. I spent weekends helping my dad fix engines in our garage, while my classmates went to soccer tournaments and mall outings. By the time I graduated from UIUC with a civil engineering degree, top 10% of my class, I already had a field job lined up in Detroit. 5 years later, I was the youngest lead integrity officer at Veritas Engineering Group, the firm responsible for some of the Midwest's biggest public transit infrastructure. Then Richard Hargrove walked in. He joined the firm 2 years ago with a six-figure smile and a spotless navy suit. Everyone loved him, especially the board. Modernize or die, he said in his first all-hands meeting. And I don't plan on dying. I should have known. At first, he just took credit for things. He turned my stress monitoring algorithm, a system that flagged metal fatigue in elevated tracks before failures occurred, into his golden ticket with the Chicago Department of Transit. He pitched it like it was his brainchild. I didn't care, not then. The system was being used. It was saving lives. That was enough. But it didn't stop there. One by one, my name started disappearing. First from presentations, then from internal white papers. I'd submit drafts, and by the time they went out to clients, my credentials were wiped. No explanations. Then came the reassignments. Instead of managing transit line modeling, I was sent to physically inspect expansion joints on a secondary bridge 40 miles outside the city. Work that could have been done by a junior tech. I tried to push back. He smiled and said it was a great opportunity to reconnect with fundamentals. Then there were the meetings, rescheduled at the last minute, always to conflict with my physical therapy appointments after the car accident. Petty moves, deliberate. When I brought it up with HR, they smiled politely and said, "You know how project bandwidths shift." I knew what was happening, so I started documenting every missed meeting, every changed file, every backdated report and missing attachment. I forwarded every suspicious email to an encrypted external account, keeping backups no one could touch. I recorded phone calls, not all of them, just the ones that mattered. And I started reviewing federal labor laws, quietly, thoroughly. I also changed my habits. No more working late alone. I kept a separate flash drive in my coat. Started tracking internal supplier changes and bonus reports. Things Richard thought no one noticed, but I noticed. When I was 15, my dad showed me a fracture in a steel girder. Just a hairline split. Invisible unless you caught it in the right light. Failure doesn't start loud, he told me. It starts quiet, hidden, until one day it brings everything down. That's how this started. And that's how it would end. It started with numbers that didn't add up. I was reviewing supplier invoices for a routine audit when I saw the first one. A shipment of heat-treated steel from a company called North Point Materials. The pricing was about 40% higher than market rate. At first, I assumed it was a surge cost. Maybe fuel or transportation had spiked. But the same supplier appeared again on a separate project 3 weeks later. Same markup, same vague invoice line items. Standard industrial alloys, with no weight breakdown, no batch identification. That's not how structural grade materials documented. Not if you're doing it right. I dug deeper. Over the next few evenings, I started cross-referencing internal project ledgers with public supplier registries. It didn't take long to see the pattern. North Point, Elevate Core Logistics, MTS Supply Group, all relatively new, all with LLC registrations out of the same 2 office parks in Indiana. Shell companies, basically. And all of them tied, loosely but traceably, to a holding firm that had one shared legal counsel, Veritas's former compliance officer. And just like that, I understood what I was looking at. This wasn't bad accounting. This was a siphon. Inflated invoices passed through fake vendors, with the cost padded and distributed across federal transit budgets. Sloppy, but buried just deep enough that most engineers wouldn't question it, especially if you were smart about spreading it out across departments. I confronted Richard during a planning meeting 2 days later. He was walking through projections for the Milwaukee Junction upgrade, going on about optimized sourcing and cost streamlined phases. I waited until everyone else left the room. Why is steel from North Point coming in at 43% over median supplier rates? I asked. He didn't miss a beat. Transportation logistics, that's been cleared. There's no routing data attached, no vehicle manifests, no batch serials. That's not standard. He smiled like I was asking about coffee filters. Petra, this isn't your scope anymore. You're on site compliance now, remember? You're laundering funds through shell vendors. His smile twitched. Just for a second. Then he leaned forward and said softly, "You're misinterpreting your role here." I knew that tone. It wasn't anger, it was warning. After that, I didn't say anything more to him directly. I went home that night and pulled every invoice for the past 6 months. I color-coded them by supplier. Then I created a timeline of when those inflated orders appeared, and noticed something else. The bonus cycles for upper management landed precisely 2 weeks after the largest overages cleared finance. Someone had built in a reward structure, kickbacks cloaked as performance incentives. I called Mila, my closest colleague, one of the few I trusted. "Something's wrong," I said. "This isn't just bad billing. This is fraud." She listened, quiet as always. Then she said, "Start backing it up, everything, and talk to someone legal." This is big. I did exactly that. At night, I read whistleblower protection statutes. I studied Sarbanes-Oxley case law until I fell asleep with a legal pad in my lap. I started preparing secure binders, time-stamped PDFs, and encrypted backups. One copy in the cloud. One on a drive hidden behind a false panel in my toolbox. I wasn't afraid yet. Not really, but I knew what was coming. The moment I said something out loud, even to one wrong person, the real retaliation would begin. And I had no intention of being caught off guard. A week after I confronted Richard, the retaliation became official. It started with a memo. Effective immediately, Petra Kozlova will transition to on-site compliance oversight for the Barrett County Rural Bridge Initiative. No call, no meeting. Just a line item in an internal bulletin, buried between staff birthdays and cafeteria menu changes. I clicked through the project details. Barrett County was 2 hours west of anything resembling civilization. The bridge in question, a concrete 2-lane overpass built in the late 80s. Structurally fine, no recent complaints, no scheduled upgrades. It was busy work, a demotion wrapped in faux responsibility, and they didn't even try to hide it. I packed my gear and drove out the next morning, spent 3 days crawling under a bridge that didn't need inspecting, submitting daily reports that no one would ever read. When I came back, my ID badge no longer granted access to the executive floor. My name was removed from the system's integrity panel. And my desk, once 2 doors down from the senior design leads, was relocated to the annex next to the server room. It buzzed with heat and stale wiring. I could barely hear myself think. This wasn't just reassigning. This was exile. That's when I called Nadine Cow. She was a labor attorney I found through a local engineers union forum. Sharp, methodical, and refreshingly blunt. We met in a quiet booth at a diner just off Belmont. She ordered tea. I handed her a manila folder thick with timelines and annotated printouts. She read in silence for 15 minutes, then finally looked up. "Petra, what you're describing could absolutely be grounds for constructive dismissal." I nodded. "That's what I thought." "But you haven't quit," she said, flipping a page. "Not planning to," I replied. "I want them to make the first move." She tapped her finger on the margin of one document. "This is smart. This pattern, change duties, isolating assignments, desk relocation, false performance claims. It's textbook retaliation." I leaned forward. "What happens if I stay? If I keep recording and logging everything until they try to fire me?" She didn't hesitate. "Then we build a stronger case. And if they're stupid enough to push you out officially, we trigger discovery and drag every invoice into daylight." I felt something in my chest ease. For the first time in months, I wasn't just reacting. I had a map. Nadine handed the folder back to me and said, "Keep doing what you're doing. Let them think they've buried you. Document everything. Time, date, who said what. Even the weather if it helps you remember. If they try to make this formal, we let them. And then we show our hand." And that's exactly what I did. A few days later, Richard sent me my first official warning notice. Failure to meet timeline benchmarks. No benchmarks were ever assigned. Then came another. Insubordination. Failure to notify manager of external correspondence. The email in question was a routine communication with a city inspector. I saved everything. I kept a tiny lapel mic clipped inside my fleece, set it to record as soon as I parked my car each morning. I took photos of every memo, scanned every marked-up report, logged every passive-aggressive Slack message. I wasn't waiting for justice. I was baiting them. Quietly, deliberately. Let them think they'd won. Let them push just one step too far. Because when the time came, I'd be ready, and I'd have the receipts. The morning they called me in, I already knew what was coming. Richard's calendar invite had no subject line, just 10 a.m., Conference Room 3A. No context, no prep materials. The kind of meeting that wasn't really a meeting. It was theater. The kind where the ending was already written. I didn't wear a suit. I didn't bring a notepad. Just a USB drive in my coat pocket and a sealed envelope tucked into a folder marked Exit Interview Notes. I walked into that room calm, spine straight, every step measured. Richard was already there. Dinah from HR sat across from him, hands folded neatly. The air smelled like office-grade coffee and something faintly metallic. He gestured for me to sit. No small talk this time. He slid a single piece of paper across the table. My resignation. I picked it up, skimmed it, and gave a small nod. It was all there, the forced language, the predated exit. The phrasing designed to make it look mutual. Clean, painless. He handed me a pen. I think you know this is the best option, Richard said smoothly. It avoids complications, preserves your reputation. I smiled at that. Not the kind you give in agreement, the kind you give when someone underestimates you. I'd like a moment, I said, motioning to the document. Just to read it through. He glanced at Dana, then his phone buzzed. Take your time, he muttered, already lifting it to his ear. I need to take this. 1 second, he stepped out of the room, phone pressed to his ear. That was all I needed. With one quick motion, I crossed out voluntary resignation in paragraph 1 and replaced it in sharp block print. Constructive termination under duress. I initialed the margin beside it. The ink dried fast. My signature followed. By the time Richard walked back in, I was sliding the paper across the table. He didn't read it, just nodded and said, "We'll be in touch about logistics." "Of course," I said, standing. I turned to Dana, handed her the sealed envelope. "This is for HR. It contains documentation and a formal complaint regarding material procurement practices under Richard's oversight. I strongly suggest you read it before the end of business." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You'll understand when you open it." I walked out without another word. On my way down the hallway, I passed Luca by the printer bank. I slowed, met his eyes, and said quietly, "Check the shared drive under my old folder. Look for a zip file called Steel Ghosts. It's all there." His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. As I stepped through security, Nico, the guard who always greeted me by name, gave a small nod. "You good?" he asked softly. "I'm great," I said. "Really?" That night, I sent everything to Nadine. The full document archive, the edited resignation, the voice memos, the supplier map, the logs. I CC'd the HR director, Veritas's general counsel, and, quietly, an oversight liaison with the Department of Transportation. The match was lit. Now it was just a matter of time. I didn't expect the call to come so soon. By 9:12 the next morning, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I let it ring through. Then another came in from Veritas HQ. This time, I picked up. "Miss Kozlova," said a clipped voice. "We'd like you to return to the office for a discussion with executive leadership. We understand your attorney will be joining." "Yes," I said, already texting Nadine. "We'll be there at 10. We walked into the same boardroom where I'd once pitched my structural optimization model to the city's transportation chief. Only this time, I wasn't carrying blueprints, just a plain manila folder, and Nadine, calm and razor-sharp in her charcoal blazer. The room was full: general counsel, HR director, a VP from the board I barely recognized, and Dana, eyes wide like she hadn't slept. Richard was not there. The VP cleared his throat. "Ms. Kozlova, Petra, we've reviewed the complaint you submitted. It's serious." "No," Nadine said smoothly. "It's extensive and legally binding." He nodded stiffly. "Right. Extensive." I watched their faces as Nadine laid everything out. Methodically, professionally. The altered invoices, the fake suppliers, the retaliation patterns, the audio clips. Then she dropped the bomb. The resignation form with my handwritten correction. "Constructive termination under duress," she said aloud, which Petra signed while Mr. Hargrove was conveniently out of the room. I could feel the air shift. That detail mattered. They knew it. Human Resources had already accepted the document. They couldn't take it back now. "We'd like to discuss how to move forward," the VP said, voice tight. "Good," Nadine said. "We have a list of terms." She opened her folder and slid a sheet across the table. Immediate reinstatement. A formal internal and external audit, led by a third-party compliance firm. Legal indemnity for Petra. And disciplinary review of all executives who signed off on the inflated procurement chain. Silence. Then the general counsel cleared his throat. We're prepared to honor the audit and review, but reinstatement. You don't have a choice, Nadine said, not unkindly. If this goes public, the Department of Transportation will freeze every transit contract you hold. Your stock price will tank. Your board will face questions. But if you take swift corrective action, you might come out of this with your reputation dented, not destroyed. The HR director nodded slowly. Others have come forward, she said, looking at me. Since yesterday, employees, a few contractors, you started something. I kept my expression neutral, but something settled in my chest. Not pride, not yet. Just confirmation that I hadn't imagined it. That it wasn't just me. The VP sighed. Richard's been placed on administrative leave effective immediately. There will be a full investigation. I looked at Nadine. She gave a small nod. I turned to the room. I want access to the new audit. I'll cooperate fully. But I also want oversight. I'm not letting this get swept under the rug. You'll have it, the general counsel said. As we left the room, Nadine leaned close and said, You just flipped the entire board with a pen stroke. I exhaled slowly, and for the first time in months, I felt the balance finally shifting back. The first audit summary landed on my desk 11 days later. By then, I'd been reinstated, technically, though my actual duties were still under review. I didn't mind. They gave me a corner office on the 12th floor, probably to keep me quiet. I set up a dry erase board, plugged in my personal laptop, and spent every hour connecting dots. No more bridge inspections, no more server room exile. I was hunting the rot, and there was plenty of it. The auditors from Kepler and Rowe didn't waste time. Their lead investigator, Tessa Hale, was ex-FBI compliance and did not believe in pleasantries. We met 3 times that first week. She said very little, just asked questions, took notes, then came back with thicker reports each day. I liked her immediately. By the end of week 2, they'd traced over $1.1 million in fraudulent overbilling, mostly routed through 5 shell corporations, all tied, directly or through intermediaries, to Richard. The money trail was clear. So were the timestamps, the internal authorizations, the performance bonuses. It was a machine, and I had jammed a wrench into it. But what shocked even me were the people who started coming forward. 11 employees, total. Some sent anonymous statements. Others asked to meet in person. There was a junior accountant who'd been quietly moved to archiving after flagging duplicate vendor payments. A former project manager who resigned last year after being pressured to backdate invoices. Even a software engineer, Luca, who found his access suddenly revoked after asking too many questions about procurement logs. It always felt off, he told me in the break room. I just didn't know what to do with it. Until you said something. I nodded, remembering the whisper I'd left him before they walked me out. He found the file. He confirmed everything. And now, people weren't avoiding me in the hallways anymore. They nodded, held doors. Some even stopped by my office just to say thanks. It was disorienting. I didn't want to be anyone's symbol. I just wanted the truth out. One afternoon, I ran into Dana from HR in the elevator. She looked tired, but relieved. You were right, she said, without needing to explain. So what happens next? Legal's preparing referrals, she said. Criminal referrals. Richard? And anyone else who signed off, she added. There'll be consequences. I nodded. Good. Later that day, Tessa handed me a copy of the final audit timeline. You were the first name in, she said, but not the only one. You kicked the door open. I stared down at the paper, hundreds of entries, vendor IDs, payment codes, notes from whistleblowers I'd never even met. It felt bigger now, not just about Richard, or the money. It was about how many people had stayed quiet, not out of malice, but fear. And now that someone had cracked the silence, they were stepping forward, one by one. I was moved to a new division shortly after, an internal task force aimed at ethical compliance and contractor vetting. A lateral promotion, they called it. But everyone knew it was more than that. I wasn't being sidelined anymore. I was being trusted. And for the first time in a long time, people were listening. Not because I raised my voice, but because I never let them take it away. 3 weeks after the audit findings were finalized, Veritas Engineering Group held its first company-wide town hall in over a year. Not the usual video call with blurry slides and fake cheer. This one was in person. Top floor, full catering, mandatory attendance. Word had gotten around. People shuffled in quietly, carrying their nervous energy like briefcases. Some avoided eye contact. Others sat straight-backed with arms crossed, waiting to hear how the firm would spin everything. I stood near the back, next to a tall window overlooking downtown Chicago. I'd gotten the invitation like everyone else, but I wasn't there as an observer. I was part of the agenda. The CEO, Amanda Lockhart, one of the few board members not tied to the fraud, stepped up to the mic. No notes, no sugarcoating. "I want to start by addressing the obvious," she said. This company failed, not just in oversight, but in culture. We allowed silence to thrive. We rewarded numbers without asking where they came from. The room was still. An investigation has confirmed widespread procurement fraud involving former executive Richard Hargrove and several contracting firms. Legal action is underway, but today isn't about him. It's about us and the people who made sure the truth came to light. She paused. "I'd like to ask Petra Kozlova to join me." Dozens of heads turned. I walked to the front, steady but aware of every footstep. Amanda offered a quiet smile and stepped aside. I didn't make a speech, just told the truth. I didn't come forward to make a point. I came forward because it was wrong, because I saw people getting pushed out, silenced, discarded, while others cashed in. I scanned the room. A few people lowered their eyes, others nodded. I spent my entire career believing that integrity mattered, that if you built something solid, it would hold. But structures don't just collapse from weight. They fail from the inside. When the supports rot and no one checks. I let that sit for a moment. This time, I checked. Silence. Then, applause. Real. Uneasy at first, but building. Afterward, Amanda made it official. I'd be leading a newly formed division. Internal ethics and compliance. Independent oversight. Anonymous reporting systems. Monthly audits. Real protections for anyone who stepped forward. Some of the same executives who once avoided me in the halls now emailed asking for my input on risk assessments. Project managers asked if I'd review their supply workflows. Engineers, even the ones who used to roll their eyes at me, began pulling me aside to ask, "Is this okay?" Not everything changed overnight, but something had shifted. Power, mostly. The kind that came not from a title, but from knowing exactly where you stand. And not moving an inch when someone tries to shove you. A week after the town hall, I received a message. Blocked number. 1 line. "You think you won. You have no idea what you started." I stared at it for a second, then deleted it. No reply, no reaction. Richard could stew in whatever corner of the legal system he'd landed in. I didn't care. I was too busy writing new protocols, mentoring junior engineers on how to spot invoice manipulation, and helping reframe how we talked about ethics. Not as a legal requirement, but as an engineering principle. Build strong, inspect often. Never assume something will hold just because it hasn't failed yet. People started stopping by my office, not with favors, but with questions, advice, gratitude. And somewhere in all of it, I realized I wasn't just fixing a system. I was rebuilding a foundation. 6 months later, I stood behind a podium in a ballroom full of engineers, regulators, and city officials. The backdrop was a tall white screen with bold navy letters, North American Symposium on Infrastructure Ethics. Someone had pinned a small wireless mic to my blazer. I hated it. I preferred steel boots and field vests, but today I was the keynote speaker. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady despite the knots in my stomach. "I'm Petra Kozlova. I'm a structural engineer, and apparently I also blew up my career. Or at least that's what I thought at the time." There were a few chuckles. Good. The crowd was listening. What I've learned is that systems don't collapse all at once. They crack slowly, under pressure, under silence. And sometimes all it takes is a single correction in a single sentence to change the outcome. I looked out over the room. Familiar faces. My former professor from UIUC, a city procurement director, a young woman from the transit authority who had emailed me months ago saying, "Because of you, I reported something I thought I had to swallow." I told them the story, not the press release version, but the real one, about being told to stay in my lane, about invoices that didn't make sense and warnings dressed as promotions, about a resignation letter rewritten in less than 4 seconds, and what happened after. I ended with something my father used to say: "Inspect the smallest weld." That's where truth lives. When I stepped down, the applause came hard and honest. Later that evening at the reception, people kept stopping me. CEOS union leaders, a group of junior engineers who asked for selfies like I was someone worth remembering. It was surreal. Toward the end of the night, I spotted Nadine across the room, glass of wine in hand, wearing the same quiet smirk she always had when she was about to say, "I told you so." "You clean up well," she said. I laughed. "You're still my emergency contact, by the way." She raised her glass. "And you're the reason my nonprofit got a 7-figure donation last week." Workplace justice isn't so niche anymore. Her nonprofit, a labor rights initiative for tech and engineering sectors, had gained serious traction since the Veritas case. We stayed in touch. More than that, we were friends now. Real ones. We clinked glasses. "Here's to changing the rules," she said. "To rebuilding them," I added. When I got back to Chicago, my new office was waiting. Top floor, same skyline view. But this time, I had a team. Compliance specialists, ethics liaisons, engineers who volunteered for monthly invoice audits. The culture had changed, not because of pressure, but because enough people had seen what silence cost us. I still kept my old hard hat by the door, just to remind myself where I started. Sometimes, at night, I sat by the window and watched the city's train lines snake through the streets. Tracks I once inspected, algorithms I once coded into sensors, now blinking quietly in junction boxes. The steel held, because someone made sure it would. A few weeks after the symposium, I got a letter from the Department of Transportation. They were launching a national pilot program based on our internal ethics model. They wanted me to consult. I said yes, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about vigilance. And once you've seen the cracks, you never stop checking.